Well, I actually started, my first job was with, they didn't call them hedge funds back then, but it was with a risk arbitrage firm. And risk arbitrage, otherwise known as merger arbitrage, involves buying a company after a merger deal is announced and hoping that it closes. And generally the risk reward in that business is, well, if the merger closes, you make $1, and if it breaks, you lose $10 or $15. And that risk reward wasn't that appealing to me. And so I started looking for other ways to do it. So I looked for mergers that had interesting securities. Coming off, the way they were paying for the merger. I looked for extraordinary events happening within companies, whether recapitalizations or spin-offs or anything where I could get out of the business where I could make $1 and lose 10 or 15. And so I was just looking for things that were a little off the beaten path. I really started learning when I was at Wharton, and at the time, Wharton was really in the efficient market camp, the way they were teaching things, and it didn't resonate with me. And my junior year, I happened to read an article about a guy named Benjamin Graham. And as soon as I read that article, I said, this makes sense to me. And I started reading everything that he wrote and started looking at the world really through a different lens. And that lens was not the first job I took, which was risk arbitrage. It was really looking for figuring out what something is worth and paying a lot less, leaving a large margin of safety. And so these special situations gave me that opportunity. I opened up that book, You Can Be a Stock Market Genius, one of the worst titles ever given to a book. It was supposed to be Any Fool Can Be a Stock Market Genius. And then my editor had the Motley Fools at the time, which was very popular. So he said, you can't use the word fool. And so my dad said, how about You Can Be a Stock Market Genius, and then in parentheses, even if you're not too smart. And so I giggled a little bit, and they only gave me a day to change the title, so I just went with it. And that wasn't a good choice. But I opened the book with a story about my in-laws who they used to live in Connecticut for part of the year, and they would spend their time antiquing, going to country auctions, going to tag sales, and they were looking for art and antiques that were undervalued. And when they found a painting at a country auction or at a tag sale, the question they asked was, if they saw a painting by an artist and they had seen that artist had just gone for auction with a similar type painting, similar size, similar genre, whatever it was, and it had sold at auction recently at 2 or 3 times the price that they could buy it for, they would go buy it. That's a lot different question than asking, is this painter going to be the next Picasso? That's a much harder challenge. So I opened the book saying special situation is a little like that. You don't want to be so smart to know who's going to be the next Picasso. You sort of want to look a little off the beaten path because this is a little more obscure. It's smaller market cap. It's something strange is going on, and the normal people who follow this aren't going to look at it because it's too complicated, or you got to read a 400-page thing, or the piece being spun off is not really why people bought the original stock in the first place. It's for the small, not for the little small business that's being spun off. So these were discarded things. So it was my way of making the challenge easier, finding things that were selling well below their fair value. It wasn't so much. I finished that first chapter of You Can Be a Stock Market Genius with a story about the plumber who comes to your house and bangs on the pipe once and says that'll be $200. Fixes your pipes and says that'll be $200. And you say to the plumber, what do you mean $200? You came here and banged on the pipe once. He says, oh no, that's only $5. It's $195 to know where to bang. So that's how I view special situation investing, just making the challenge easier. And so I'd rather be a little, not as smart and a little bit lazy, but go for, Warren Buffett would call them 1-foot hurdles. Why go around looking for 10-foot hurdles to jump over if you could find some one-foot ones. So I don't have to be all that smart to be good if I'm looking in the right places.
You know, Joel, I wrote a memo in January of 14 called Getting Lucky. I told the story of a guy who was working on becoming a better poker player. So he's working on learning the odds of getting the cards you need, the odds that the hand you had would beat other hands, the tells that tell you whether the other side is bluffing or not. And his uncle said to him, "You're wasting your time trying to become a better poker player. Why don't you just find an easier game?" And it sounds to me like what you did is look for what you thought were easy games.
Yeah, it's, you know, the last story I told in the book that illustrates the same point is I tell a story that I lost a bet. And the loser had to take the winner to the best restaurant in New York. At the time, it was Lattès. There was a chef there, Andre Saltner, which at the time was considered probably the world's greatest chef. And so first I called up and they wouldn't give me a reservation. You know, I said, "I'll take any time, any day." And they said, "Sorry." I didn't understand that. And it turns out, you know, there's some 30-day period where they'll only book for 30 days and they were all booked. So I kept calling back, finally got in. We get to the restaurant, and I wasn't really paying attention to who came over to take my order, but I pull out my menu and point to one of the appetizers, and I said innocently, I pointed to one and I said, "Is this one any good?" So Andre Saltner turns to me and says, "No, it stinks." So, you know, best chef in the world, I'm asking if, you know, this thing he just cooked is any good. And so the point was, I think the point he was making was everything on the menu is good. This is the best restaurant in the world. And so I try to shop in the best places where almost everything is good, and I just have to discern between a bunch of different good things.